Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to Project HR, a podcast dedicated to building better workplaces. Project HR is brought to you by Projections, an IRI company. IRI helps organizations navigate workplace challenges, improve employee engagement and productivity, manage labor relations, and implement effective communication strategies to achieve their goals. For more information, you can visit Projections online at projectionsinc.com. I am Jennifer Oraquah, Director of Business Development for IRI, and your host for today's episode of Project HR. Now, we all know that if something can go wrong, it will. Every project, every department, every company encounters difficulties along the way to our goals and ambitions. As people leaders, it's our job to anticipate those difficulties, or barring that, at least manage them to the best of our abilities. That requires agility and course correction, and being able to take a tough situation and turn it around. This ability to course correct can make or break our success. And today I'm talking with someone who has quite literally written the book on how to turn things around. Lisa Gable is recognized worldwide as a turnaround mastermind. As a CEO, former U.S. ambassador, and advisor to Fortune 500 companies, Lisa has orchestrated the successful turnarounds of private and public organizations in a huge variety of industries. She's the CEO of FAIR, the world's premier organization fighting food allergies, and was named one of the 10 most innovative businesswomen in 2020. In addition, Lisa is the founding member of Chief and Wall Street Journal bestselling author of Turnaround, How to Change Course When Things Are Going South. Lisa, it's so great to have you here on Project HR.
Well, it's so great to be here. I really appreciate your inviting me.
Yeah. So let's start with you and your career and your work. You've worked in so many diverse areas. I'm fascinated by this. Can you share a little bit about your background?
Sure. Well, I started my career during the Reagan administration at the Department of Defense in the White House, basically during the end of the Cold War, which was probably the biggest turnaround in history, was the
Sure.
fall of the Berlin Wall,
Right.
and was recruited into Silicon Valley. And while I was in Silicon Valley, I was working directly for a man by the name of Craig Barrett. And Craig at that time was Senior Vice President of Manufacturing. He turned around how Intel Corporation manufactured worldwide, and later would become the CEO and chairman of the board of Intel. And what Craig taught me is how to take manufacturing principles and use them to turn around organizations, to solve complex problems, to make things work better. And so what I've done throughout my career is I've sort of led this parallel life, and it's a little hard to understand when you look at my resume. It would always make headhunters very confused, which is that I was working full time in business, but I also would have presidential and gubernatorial appointments to different advisory boards under four presidents, two governors. And so I had this parallel activity going on. And so I was also, and later as serving as a U.S. ambassador, learning the art of diplomacy. And so I've interwoven the art of diplomacy with manufacturing principles. And that's really the essence of my book, Turnaround.
That's fascinating. So all those experiences certainly would have taught you how to stay agile and turn things around. Was there a specific incident? Was there a catalyst or a challenge that led you to write the book, or was this a cumulative decision over your years of experience?
It was really COVID. What was going on is I was talking to a publisher about writing a book on leadership and character, which is something that's very important to me and something that I speak a lot about. And he said, Lisa, the thing is, you've done these unusual turnarounds in business, government, and philanthropy. And I think that is going to be just information a lot of people will need as we are coming out of whatever this pandemic does to us. And so he said, and by the way, I'd really like to publish it right away in Q4 of 2021. So I wrote the book from basically Labor Day weekend through December 31st of 2020. I would get up at 7:00 in the morning and I would write until 4:00 at night on Saturdays and Sundays for basically 6 months straight, and meet with my editor at nighttime because I had a day job. And so that was a little complicated. But, it was really trying to understand what I've done and how I could help people and also give people hope. It's been a rough time. And so I wanted to make sure that I addressed the human factors of what we go through so people could acknowledge that as they were making some pretty tough decisions.
I love that it's a passion project and you're also putting it out there to help other people. That's fantastic. So my big question, digging into the content, is why do things go wrong? I mean, we can joke and kid about Murphy's Law, but can we isolate common causes of the kinds of things that go wrong that need to turn around?
We can. One of the things that I talk a lot about in the book is you've got to find the underlying cause of what's making the thing not work. Whatever that thing is, it can be a big project, it can be a company, it can be an organization, it can be a not-for-profit. And I've sort of culled it down to a couple of key points. One is that they are built on haphazardly designed processes and structures. And what I mean by that is sometimes we build things so quickly we forget to put the process in place. Another point is that those in charge believe more money can solve everything. I am brought into situations by billionaires and CEOs or presidents who are trying to fix something that they really need to have work. And what's happened in the past sometimes is that people have thrown a lot of money at it. And what I learned in my career is that if you have to work your way out of a box, you usually are better at solving a problem. If you add too much money, things can grow and expand. And actually, all you're doing is you're making the problem worse.
Mm-hmm.
Another key point is the economics of the business make the end goal impossible. And so organizations sometimes are led by people who don't really understand the impact of regulation or supply chains or changing economic dynamics. And what we find in turnarounds is that in many cases, the economics, and we see that today, right? We have the rise of inflation, we have supply chain issues, we have these variables that are going to impact the business. And so you have to always adjust your business to understand what the economics are of the day.
Mm.
The other is that people get really stuck in these cookie cutter approaches. And so there are these ideas that we get from consultants, and I'm not necessarily dinging consultants, but you have these 7 paths forward for doing X.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't always apply. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
there are bits and pieces that apply, but you can't always stick with the same old truism, especially in such a dynamic world. Sometimes you find, and I found this, that leaders will make self interested or empire building decisions. I know we've got a bunch of HR professionals listening, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
need to explain that one to anybody
Right.
because I'm sure it's the
We
one
get
thing
it.
yeah, you absolutely get it. And
Yep.
I think the final thing is that sometimes founders overstay their welcome, and you hear about the founder syndrome. And
Mm-hmm.
again, for people that have been part of a startup or part of an organization, it gets built in such a way that it speaks to the founder's core competencies. But what you need to start an organization, launch a startup, is not necessarily the
Mm-hmm.
same talent that you need to grow it. And
Yep.
so people need to step back and they need to put their ego aside and understand that sometimes you got to hand it over to somebody else who has a different skill set if that thing that you put your blood, sweat, tears, and energy into needs to survive.
Mhm. And that goes back to the old, what got you here won't get you there. So the good news in that idea is that we do have control over a lot of the causes for things that go south. But we can't control everything. And as you mentioned a second ago, that's where agility comes in. Is that right?
Absolutely. You need to be very flexible. And I tell people that throughout my life, because I've planned it that way or because I've had to due to other issues that have confronted me, you've got to zigzag. And what you want to do is you got to keep your eye on the goal, but you are going to have to pivot. And the question is, when can we stop pivoting? And I know that truly is the question as we look at yet another variant. It's
Right.
like, okay, I'm done pivoting. But you've got to. We are really, I was talking to a member of my senior staff because I can only plan in 90-day increments. I said, I
Hmm.
know. We just have to keep our eye and keep everybody focused on these are the 5 things we want to accomplish by the end of 2022. This is how much money we have to spend. But you
Hmm.
know what? We're going to have to look at 90-day plans.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. So, in your opinion, is agility a mindset or is it an actual learned skill? I mean, obviously, the 90-day plan, that's something that comes from a skill, or is it both?
It's a combination, and it's so interesting that you should ask this question because I've also sort of recognized that I have people that I work with who are very black and white. And guess what? Black and white people do not like to pivot. They do not like to play three-dimensional chess.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got to help mentor those people through the requirements of accepting the situation as it is. I'm not saying that we have to accept bad things, but what we've got to do is you've got to accept that the world is not perfect, and that you may want to use your processes, stick with your plan, And that is important. It's what I talk about in my book is sticking with your plan. But at the same time, you have to recognize that at different points, you're going to have to accept things that maybe you don't like so much. It may be that you have an employee in a position and they're really, really good at 60% of their job. Well, at this stage of the game, you've got to decide, can I mentor them through the 40%? Do I have the ability to make a change right now in the stream of a lot of churn that's going on within the organization? Or is there some way that I have to accommodate the 60% because I really need that? And
Mm,
so I think agility is being able to play that three-dimensional chess, understand that sometimes you have to deal with the world as it's handed to you right now,
hmm.
and that can be difficult for people.
For sure. All right, Lisa, we're going to take a quick sponsorship break right now, but when we come back, I want to talk about your turnaround method specifically. So stay with us.
Your frontline leaders need skills and knowledge to support your organization's growth. They've got to motivate their team, support employees when they struggle, and connect with their people, all while continually improving their own skills. To help make your organization more successful, the A Better Leader team has created a free guide to selecting and educating your leaders. Before you hire another supervisor, before you give another merit-based promotion, read this practical guide. The 4 Qualities That Make Great Leaders provides practical tips on creating better leaders for your organization. The free guide also includes actionable steps on testing potential hires for these qualities during the hiring process so your supervisors have what they need from day one. Download this guide now at projectionsinc.com/abetterleader. You'll be glad you did.
We're back with Lisa Gable, author of Turnaround: How to Change Course When Things Are Going South. Now, Lisa, before the break, I promised to explore your turnaround method. It's been described as a battle-tested method. Can you tell us how it was developed and tested?
Well, it was basically tested over my life. I've been working for about 38 years now, and I have done turnarounds in business, government, and philanthropy. And what I discovered is that I was really using the same processes every single time. It didn't matter if I was leading US engagement at the World's Fair, what's now called the World Expo,
Hmm.
or if I was working at Intel Corporation, or if I was running a not for profit. Basically, humans are humans, processes are processes, and the world complexities present themselves in different ways, but they're things that you can do that apply in all situations.
So I'm fascinated. Can you tell us the steps involved in your method?
Sure, step number one is visualize the future. Don't fix what's there, start from scratch. And I'll explain that in a little bit, so don't panic.
Okay.
Break down the past, ditch what isn't working, and keep what does. Create a path from your present to your future. Map out your critical decisions and the actions you need to take. And finally, execute with confidence and diplomacy. Speed up partnering well with other people and have heart. That's another piece of this is I really want people to think about the impact of their decisions on other people.
That makes perfect sense. So let's back up a little bit. Let's talk about step one, what it is, and tell me why it's so important.
Well, I talk about visualizing the future and I talk about not focusing on what's in front of you, but thinking about what's in the future. And I use this phrase, burn it down to the ground. And people are like, oh my God, what do we have to like? That's really said. But what I'm talking about, it's a mental exercise. What you have to do is you have to force yourself to think, if I was starting this institution today, if I was starting this project today, and I could wave my magic wand, what would I want it to look like? Where would I want to go? And by forcing yourself to just step out of the environment that you are in mentally, think about exactly what the future is you want to see and be able to design what it is that you actually would have done if you could have your perfect world scenario. That's your starting point.
Hmm. So if step one is about imagining what's ahead, step two is looking back at what's behind us. Can you tell me a little bit about step two?
Yeah, what you need to do is you need to figure out what went wrong. And in some cases, it may need going back to sort of the beginning of the organization because perhaps it actually was started with bad fundamentals. In
Mm.
other cases, it's auditing everything that you were doing today. You're really trying to find the underlying cause of what got you there. And people make a lot of assumptions. They think they know the reason why you're in a bad position. But the reality is, they're basing that based on their knowledge at this moment in time. And
Mhm.
so when you walk into a situation, you actually need to audit the past. You need to go back and say, when were key decisions made? And one person brought forward to me a point recently, and I thought it was quite excellent. They said, you know what COVID has done is identified the cracks in the organization. And when you look back historically, you can see where those cracks emerged. The
Hmm.
critical thing in step number two is auditing where you are today. And I talk a lot about building stacks. For me, I'm very visual in how I do this. I used to do brand identity projects, and so there was this visual element that I've continued forward, which is that you're organizing the activities that the organization's involved with based on their characteristics, not on what they are. So some people think, oh, I'm going to audit everything that has to do with finance, and then I'm going to audit everything that has to do with communications.
Mhm.
No, you don't. What you want to audit is, I have to deal with a customer. I have to deliver this product to the customer. What are all the activities that I am doing to move that product to the customer? What are our license agreements? What communications do I use? What finance operational systems do I put into place? And that becomes it can be a virtual stack. It can literally be a physical stack. You can do it on an Excel spreadsheet. But as you do that audit, you're then comparing the activities that you're doing based on the perfect future that you designed for yourself in step number one. Because in step number one, you said, I want the world to look like this. And if I were starting today, this is how I would build it. So you're
Mhm.
taking your perfect and you're analyzing your present, and you're identifying where things went awry. But secondarily, is you're starting your process that's going to allow you to move into your next step, because you've audited what you're doing and you're basically figuring out what's working and what's not working.
So I'm curious though, the step two audit process, it could end up in blame or finger pointing if we're not doing it right. How can we be sure it has heart, like you mentioned?
Well, you've got to, again, things get messy based over a period of time. It's really no one's fault. Okay, I'm going to take that back. Sometimes it is a person's fault.
Sure.
Again, you're HR manager, so you know if you have that super arrogant CEO that's yelling at people, or
Mhm.
you have that executive who demoralizes people, people might start doing things. They're like children, right? They're creeping around in the background and trying to do stuff, but they're so scared to talk to the person about getting advice
Hmm.
because they're not getting any direction, that they may be making decisions that are short-sighted. However, in the majority of situations, there are a confluence of activities that cause the thing to go off the rails. So you may have hubris, you might have the arrogance of individuals involved, but
Mhm.
that's led into decisions. Or you might have a shortage within the supply chain that's forced compromises, and then people forgot why they compromised, and maybe they continue doing things. They don't ever stop and go, oh, we made those decisions because of this moment in time and the characteristics of that moment in time. And they continue operating in a manner that's not necessarily efficient. So and then there's just the basic economics of the business and the construct of the business. I force people to go through this auditing process once a year.
Hmm.
I actually make my staff do it continuously. It's kind of where I try to make my family do it, and I'm not very successful. It's like, okay, can we clean out things? Does it all need to stack up? But you've got to go through the process. And if you make it a continuous improvement process, then you can stop the blame game. There
Mhm.
are places where a person does something that will make something not work, but did they do it intentionally, or did they do it because they had to compromise because they were facing a boulder in the road, and
Mhm.
then did bad characteristics continue throughout the enterprise?
Mhm. For sure. And what can we learn from that? If there was a boulder in the road or, whatever those circumstances might be. So we have our goal in mind. We're aware of the missteps in the past. What happens next? What's step three?
The next step is you've got to create a path from where you are today to where you want to go.
Okay.
And so I call this a ranking and rating process. You've got to rank and rate what you're doing. You've got your stacks and you're sitting there and you've got to make decisions. And I talk a lot about job one, two, and three, and the importance of identifying what is the most important thing we have got to do to make our organization meet its end goal. And then jobs two and three are sort of your backup singers, your
Mm.
instrumentalists. What are the other activities that are going to best enable us to do job one? And then you rank everything you're doing against those three activities.
Hmm.
And if it doesn't rank high, you make a decision. Do I get rid of it today? Or do I do a planned maneuver out of it in the future? We all talk about the fact that you've got to, build the airplane while you're flying it.
Hmm. Hmm.
You don't have the luxury of stopping everything. I used to have
Right.
a client that they would stop everything. I'm like, no, you got to keep moving forward. So
Right.
you can't. In fact, before Steve Jobs came back into Apple, Apple was my client, so I can talk about it because it's been so many iterations of CEOs since then. They literally would stop working during every reorg. It was like, don't stop.
Right.
You've got to move forward. And the reason you've got to move forward is that you're going to plan exit strategies from activities, but
Hmm.
you're going to have the end goal of ranking and rating and getting rid of things. And here's one way you get rid of them is you use decision trees. I love decision trees, and I have a decision tree in my book, and I use them all the time because it gets you on one sheet of paper a
Hmm.
matrix of how you make a decision towards your end goal, and you use that to stop all of the finger pointing in the room and
Hmm.
all the argument in the room. So here's our decision tree. We're all going through the same path. Does it look like this? Yep. Okay. Well, then that's a yes. Ooh, doesn't quite fit our matrix. Got to go to a no.
Hmm.
And what that does is it also allows you to start building your path because you do identify where your inflection points are, where your end game points are, where you ultimately need to end up, and what are the primary things you need to focus on. But that's really tough, right? It's hard
Hmm.
to get
Hmm.
rid of stuff. It's
Sure.
probably one of the hardest human characteristics that we have is people hate throwing stuff away.
So let's talk about kind of the elephant in the room here of approval by committee. How many people should be involved in plotting out the path to the future?
Not a lot. What you, vision is really important and leadership is important. You've got to get your core leaders, and that might be your board of directors and your CEO and your executive team. Everybody's got to agree. These are what our options are. We recognize why we have to face these critical decision points. We
Hmm.
start to agree on what those factors are that are inhibiting us from getting to where we want to go.
Hmm.
And then we need to set the process of where it is that we want to end up. The reason I like decision trees is they get rid of committees. It
Mm.
makes it a very black and white process because committees will go round and round and round, and
Right.
nobody's worse than the government on committees. It just goes on and on and on. It's like,
Right.
okay, enough already. We all decided we needed to get there, and whoops,
Right.
that vaccine's gotta get out the door. And I think that's actually one thing that COVID taught us is I
Yeah.
just did a panel yesterday with Pfizer, UPS, and CVS. They didn't have a choice in the matter.
Hmm.
They were told you need to deliver that vaccine in this type of cold storage, and it's going to go bad in X
Hmm.
number of days.
Yep.
Well, when you are faced with that decision, three companies, and actually more, Moderna and Walgreens did the same thing. They just weren't on the panel,
Hmm.
but they all had to come together as this group of companies and make really fast decisions because they didn't have a choice in the matter.
Right.
And you've got to force people into that process. And I think it's a proof point that committees are actually overrated. And don't ever ask me to sign up for one.
So all of this kind of brings us to the last step in the turnaround method. So you're putting the whole process into action. Can you tell us a little bit how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this gets into the committee question, right?
Hmm.
Stop talking about it. Execute. You've gone through the process. You defined where you want to go. You've come up with your perfect role scenario. You've audited everything. You've ranked and rated everything. You've gone through the decision tree. Stop mucking around. Execute and execute quickly. Make really quick decisions. You have materials now. You have a strategic plan that you can back up each of your decisions against. Stop revisiting things,
Hmm.
and you have the confidence that you did the process. Yeah, you're going to have to pivot if some boulder pops up in the middle of the road, but you
Hmm.
keep moving forward, and you have the confidence that you can. We've talked about being nimble, being agile, and then the other piece of my 4 step process is heart. You are going to, it's a turnaround.
Hmm.
You're going to make a decision that's going to make somebody unhappy. It might make a board member, a donor unhappy because you may be dropping their favorite project. You actually may decide that it doesn't matter how much money they give you, it doesn't fit. And it
Mm.
actually drags down the rest of the organization or
Mm.
causes a distraction. You may have to lay off people. You might have to let go of a customer relationship. You have to make hard decisions, but you also have to acknowledge what impact your decision has on other people. It
Mhm.
doesn't stop you from making the decision, but it should guide you in how you
Mhm.
communicate that decision. And I'm old. I'm like heading into my 60s now. I'm 58, almost 58. I've been working for almost 40 years. And what I tell people is life is basically a soap opera. I have lived and worked all around the world. I can't begin to tell you how many people I run into again, how many people I end up working with again. So think about how you deliver your message and
Mhm.
think about, hey, maybe I want to partner with this person one day.
Mhm.
Maybe I help them get a job in a company or an organization that could be a potential partner. Don't be dismissive about how you manage the relationship. Also, the other thing is people grow up. I think one of the things that kills me is the way somebody acted in their 20s is not going to be what they're like in their
Mhm.
40s.
Sure.
So be kind.
Mhm. Yeah, and that always goes back to the old adage of, people never forget how you made them feel. So I think that plays in there too. But step 4 values speed and confidence. Is this to are we maintaining momentum there or morale? What does that speed and confidence speak to?
It is the only way to maintain morale, I believe, is you've got to rip the band-aid off.
Mm.
One of the things that I think hurts morale the most is when people take too long to do the hard stuff.
Mm.
When I come in to do a turnaround, I was taught a friend of mine who was at Salesforce for a year and managed sort of executive training for them was her best advice. She goes, walk in the door, tell them exactly what the situation is, exactly the decisions that you're going to make, tell them how it may impact them, and then do it really quickly. And she said that is the best way of handling morale, and just be honest with people. I do a lot of shuttle diplomacy. I'm exhausted by the end of the initial couple of months because I do personally believe in spending time with people. And so I go and I sit at people's desks. I will fly, drive, get to wherever I have to do to
Mhm.
have that in-person conversation with somebody if it's really important to make them understand they're not going to be happy, but I respect them enough to show up on their doorstep and talk to them about it.
Mhm. For sure. All right, Lisa, I'm going to take some time out for another quick break. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to the Project HR podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Oraqua, and today I'm talking with Lisa Gable, author of Turnaround: How to Change Course When Things Are Going South. And we are back. So, Lisa, one thing I appreciate about both your method and the book itself is that it makes course correction a group effort. There's not a single hero riding up to save the day. How can we make success a collective accomplishment?
Well, again, you've got to get everybody on the same page, and they don't have to all agree. But I follow this process that I learned at Intel Corporation called disagree and commit. And if you can get people to say, Intel would be very loud. They'd literally fight it out in conference rooms. But the moment they walked out the door, there was no passive aggressiveness. There
Hmm.
was a decision that we will disagree and we will commit to this action. And that enables you to build momentum. It also enables you to get everybody moving forward. And then you celebrate, right? Like along
Hmm.
the way, you build into your timeline, you celebrate the big wins, you celebrate the small wins. You have the victory laps. They're so important.
Hmm. For sure. So, are there things that organizations can do to prevent the need for future turnaround efforts? What can we learn? What can we do today to help avoid having to employ the turnaround method in the future?
Well, you can avoid having an organization go way south. That
Hmm.
you could do. I'm very proud. I go back and I check on organizations that I did turn around and I see how they're doing. I helped actually design a charter school that I check on every single year. And I'm so proud that for 20 years it's been in the top 10 schools in the state of Arizona. So, it's demonstrative that a new process worked. But in today's world, I think what we have to understand, and one reason why I think my book is applicable to the moment in time of today, is innovation and technology are moving so quickly, combined with external factors. In this case, it's COVID, but it could be a war that might take place or something else that might happen. That we are going to be going through a period where we have to do these steps all the time in order to not have things go south. And so that agility is going to have to be built into how we see the world. The
Hmm.
second piece of that is that you're seeing massive mergers across different sectors. And so it's been interesting for me that all of a sudden I've worked in agriculture and consumer products good, food and beverage manufacturers and pharmaceuticals. They're literally merging right now.
Hmm.
Tech
Hmm.
companies. And
Yep.
so, be prepared that you are going to think through these steps constantly because you may find yourself in very unusual mergers and you have to hit the ground running. And
Hmm.
so I think you can avoid having things go fall through cracks on the floor, and blow up. But at the same time, I think we're going to see a rapidly changing world over the next 5 years.
For sure. And I think as the economy changes, as we're watching that happen, the skills that you're teaching here are invaluable because they can lay the foundation for anything that's thrown at us. So if I want to learn more about you or I want to find more about your book or, as things progress, where should we go?
Go to turnaroundbook.com. And that's where you can learn all about my book. I'm also being sold on every single major bookstore like Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes and Noble, but turnaroundbook.com. You can also follow me on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn under Lisa Gable Author. And I love talking to people, so send me a message and I do reply.
Fantastic. I'm going to do all of those things, so don't be surprised. I want to let our listeners know that those links will be included in the episode's companion guide, so be sure to unlock it today at projectionsinc.com/podcast. Right now, though, Lisa, it is time for our lightning round questions, and these are questions we ask of every guest of the podcast. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, so our first question is always a topic showdown. In this episode, we've been talking about turnarounds. In your opinion, Lisa, which of these classic turnaround songs is best? Gloria Estefan's Turn the Beat Around or Bonnie Tyler's Total Eclipse of the Heart?
Absolutely turn the beat around. I love that. And she talks about getting into the nitty gritty. I'm not quite sure we mean the same thing, but I think that it lines up with the book.
I love it. All right. So what's the best book that you've read recently?
You know what? I have to say the best way for me to turn my brain off is I grab a wonderful David Baldacci book or John Grisham. So I love all of them. I like the series. And if I'm in a good novel, then I can finally relax.
For sure. There is great value in a good novel. All right. What's your favorite thing about the work that you do?
I love the people. I am a people person. I love people, putting people together. I love mentoring people. I love helping people get to the place they never thought they could go.
Absolutely. All right. So what's the best piece of advice that you've ever been given?
My dad told me, he said, every stumbling block in my life has actually led to my greatest opportunity. And that's how I view the world. And as I look through the history of my life, he's absolutely true. Sometimes it's hard to believe it, but it actually comes out in the end.
All right. Finally, who or what inspires you?
I'm a Ronald Reagan fan. People hear me talk about it because I loved the concept of a shining city on a hill, the fact that people can be leaders. It's not a political statement. It's just the fact that leadership is within each and every one of us. And so it's something that I hold on to.
I like that. Lisa, thanks so much for joining me today on this week's episode of Project HR.
Thanks for having me.
I also want to thank our listeners. Once again, this is your reminder to grab the companion guide for this episode at projectionsinc.com/podcast. And if you'd like to be on Project HR or you know someone who would, feel free to email us at projecthr@projectionsinc.com. And last but certainly not least, make sure you never miss an episode of Project HR. I hope you'll subscribe to the podcast. Drop us a line, leave us a review, or give us a handful of stars wherever you get your content. That's it from me for now. Let's make it a great day at work.